And we
And we got
are
it.
recording with Professor Roger Williams. Professor Roger has been coming. I'm actually uploading the entire library to Cloud Hub and then to Brighteon, just two free video platforms. So I'm going through, and every time I find a new platform like Rumble or BitChute or Odyssey, and I go back through and upload every episode, I can't help but see like the thumbnails for them all,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like a weird trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
And even though it's only been 2.5 years, and then I was just looking back, and I was like, oh, I was like, Professor Rot, you've been on here since like the early 100s.
Mm-hmm.
There's the history of, or there's gambling in New Orleans. There's a history of pornography, history of vacuum tubes. It's going through all of it. I was like, Professor Roger's been going on for a while. So, um,
I mean, actually, I was originally that was what I was here
oh
for
yeah, I forgot that was before you. Yeah, I
before we even
forget.
started doing readings and
Oh,
stuff.
you're right. It was the OG Professor. And for anyone that doesn't know, the readings of the curators, we've done 15 episodes on that. Roger's the author of my favorite book, a fiction book about the technological singularity and what happens when you actually cross the threshold. And there is a copy of it, The
Mhm.
Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. I'll put the book in the description. As always, it is available on Amazon and Lulu. It's the same price on both. Roger gets more
Mhm.
money if you do it on Lulu, but if you want it on Amazon, it's there too. It's a fantastic book. I think it fully fleshes out what happens past the singularity, and it's terrifying and interesting. And
It's
Roger,
it's a possibility.
it's a possibility. And Roger also does Professor Roger, where he comes on here and graciously gives me his time and goes through either the history or the phenomena or
Mhm.
whatever of something. I call it Professor Roger, and
Even though I don't have a college degree.
doesn't matter. He's Professor Roger. We're all faking it through this life. And I don't have a podcasting degree. But I texted you earlier this week because I just finished listening to Operation
Mhm.
Paperclip by Annie Jacobson, and I'm listening to KL by Nicholas Voshman about the concentration camps
Yes.
and the very fascinating book. I've been putting off listening to the whole thing for like 2 years, and I'm finally doing it. About the history of the KL, nothing to do with the war. It's just the KL, how the concentration camps, how they rose, how they documented. I didn't know this. They didn't actually start putting tattoos on people until like 1942. I thought that was something that started from the.
Yeah, a lot of the really outrageous shit didn't get rolling until after we were at war with Germany, and
And
that's why we didn't know about a lot of it until after the war was
yeah.
over. Because before 1941, we had journalists over there, we
Mhm.
had regular trade, we had yeah, American tourists were still going to Germany in 1940. It wasn't as common as it was before things got tense, but you got to remember that there were a lot of Americans who were actually favoring Germany in the Axis conflict. They wanted Germany to win. They liked Hitler. They thought they liked his ideas. A lot of industrialists like Ford were like
Prescott
that.
Bush.
Yeah. So it was a very big sudden change when Pearl Harbor happened, and suddenly we were at war with these people who looked so much and acted so much like us.
Mm.
Uh, and the Germans themselves didn't want to be at war with us either. The Japanese kind of stabbed them in the back by attacking us and dragged them into the war because they knew that our natural resources and our population was a serious problem for them if they had to go toe to toe with us. And the way that Hitler actually phrased that was he said, the Americans have mongrel strength. He thought we were a bunch of unbred assholes, but like a mongrel, you don't take your purebred dog and let it get into a street fight with a mutt.
Yeah.
The mutt is probably going to bite your purebred dachshund's head off.
Yeah.
So they knew that into it with America was not a thing they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that does bring us, though, to a very interesting era in the history of information processing that we haven't touched on, because there are some people who are positively obsessed with the fact that the Nazis were using IBM data processing equipment to keep track of things in the death camps.
Mm.
And I'm going to say something that is probably pretty shocking. Of course they were.
Yeah. Well,
It would be astonishing if they weren't.
yeah.
Uh,
Everything else they did was so mechanized and the killing of the people was so. Why wouldn't they? I just realized
Well,
that I know very little about it.
well, and the thing is, this equipment was actually not very special. It was extremely ubiquitous. It was all over the place. And first of all, before December 1941, there was no reason for IBM or any American company to not do business with the German government at all. We weren't at war with them. A lot of our people liked them. We were like, hey, in this dust up over in Europe, we favor these guys. They look like us. We like their ideas. After 1941 was when it became a problem because now we're at war. Now, the thing is, in the in certain international trade things, if you think about these machines, I'm going to talk a lot about how they work in a minute because that informs why they were so ubiquitous and why the Germans would have access to them. They were everywhere. They were used by every large organization in the world that had the means to acquire them and that had a lot of stuff that they needed to keep track of. And they wouldn't have been considered war materiel. It wasn't like you were trading with the enemy for weapons or something like that. It was office equipment. You could go back and say, yes, we used the back channel to sell them some tabulating machines. What the fuck? They're not using them to shoot at people. And a lot of people would have bought that argument. Now, by the end of World War II, not so much, because by that time, I think particularly the American military had come to realize how critical things like that are. In fact, failure to keep track of stuff like that is one of the things that's killing Russia and Ukraine right now. But at the beginning of World War II, no one would have thought of these machines as being war critical. They were commodity devices. So, but most people don't remember what they were because computers made this class of machines completely obsolete and no one makes them anymore. People have completely forgotten what they look like, how they worked, everything. It used to be in the 60s and 70s, if you're a citizen, if you did business with any large business, you saw the occasional Hollerith punched card because you would get one in the mail that you had to forward to someone or mark up or something. And it would have that famous, everybody knew the famous thing that was printed on all the Hollerith cards that were sent to to members of the public. Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. Now, is that a computer thing or what? What they meant is fold is obvious enough. It's a piece of cardboard about that big. Okay, don't fold it in half because then it won't go through the automatic reader. Don't wrap it around something like to put it in a tube, and don't tear it in half or otherwise crunch it up or something because its whole purpose in existence is to go through an automatic reader. And if you mess it up, then some human being somewhere is going to have to take care of making a copy of it that is still flat enough to go through the automatic reader. These things were invented in the 1880s by a dude named Herman Hollerith. He was a United States Census statistician. Yeah, he did statistics for the Census Bureau.
He did statistics. Shut up. Pay attention.
So he was a census worker, but he was not like the ones who go around canvassing and going door to door and filling the forms out. He was the guy that the governor would come to and say, how many House seats are we going to have this year or for the next 10 years? What is our population? Or something like, how many men of draft age with no college education live in our state and what is their total annual income? That's the kind of question that they would ask. So in these days, what would happen is you would turn in your census form, and the first thing that would happen to it is it would go before a key punch operator who would sit at a key punch machine and transcribe it onto a card. So you have this machine that looks like a typewriter, has the keyboard, okay, but what happens is a card drops in, and as you're typing, it's punching the holes in the card to represent the symbols that you're typing. And that card then becomes the basis of everything else. The census form goes in the file cabinet, and most likely no one ever looks at it again because the punch card is God after 1890. You can take that stack of punch cards and you can run it through a machine that reads them at the rate of 2 or 3 a second and ask it, how many of these represent blank? And at the end of the run, 2 or 3 cards a second, you get an answer. This would take an army of, you know, secretaries a month to do what this sorting machine can do in a day or two. So it became the basis of everything. It was started with the census, it went to other government functions, and then it spread into industry. Any large industry, they would have a stack of cards, one card for each of their employees, all 20,000 of them, if you're a company like IBM. They would have a stack of cards for all their vendors or a stack of cards for all their customers. That was a database. In the years before the night, really before 1970 or so, that was a database. The database was a stack of cards. Okay. This was a very mature technology by World War II that had been around for 40 years.
Okay.
And there were established techniques for dealing with mountains of these cards,
Okay.
for storing them, for moving them, for putting them in the machines and putting them back in storage. The machines could do basic things. Now, how do these machines work? Okay, so these were punched cards. So they have a hole in them for each data point. And they used what is called, this is a term of art, I am not making this up, a bed of nails sensor.
What?
Okay, so a standard IBM card has 80 columns of 12 possible holes. That's 960 possible places there might be a hole. So the machine would have a head the size of the card with 960 pins sticking
Oh,
out.
okay. Interesting.
And it would go through the machine and the machine would go thump. And while that sensor is up against it, the pins are either pushed back in by the card because there's cardboard there, or they don't get pushed back because there's a hole.
Oh.
And the earliest machines worked on the very simple principle that you would use a plug board to pick which holes, which switches are in series to say, if these holes are there in the card, then do something with that card. Originally, when Hollerith first invented these things, what they would do is they would increment a counter. That was still big. Later, they could do much fancier stuff. They could kick the card out and turn it into a different pile. So you would end up with a pile of only your draft age citizens. And then you could take that and run it through the machine with different plug board settings and get only those draft age citizens who didn't have a college education. You know, whatever categories you have encoded by these pins. Later, they could do fancier stuff than that. They could stop the machine for a minute and make a copy of that card, or maybe a partial copy with some different information that would represent what this card was other than what the original card was. Later than that, when you get into the 30s and 40s, they had machines, they could take numbers and add them that were encoded onto the card. So you could actually say, what's the total aggregate income of all the people in this category? And it could take those numbers and add them up as it processed the stack of cards. It could print reports. They had line printers. And the way those worked was, this is all electromechanical. There was no electronics. So the line printer would work. They would have a spinning wheel for each of the like 130 columns. And it runs this fan fold paper through, right? And each of those wheels would spin until it got to the point where the sensor on the wheel matched what was on the card. And when all of the wheels stopped spinning, meaning that they matched, thump, it would print a line. And I've seen these printers at work because as I'm about to move on, they ended up being used in the computer industry. And you would see these printers going thump, 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 thump all day long. Okay. They used massive amounts of power and enormous motors and solenoids. They were extremely highly engineered electromechanical devices, but they were the state of the art. If you have millions of something that you need to keep track of, and you got them from different places and you're keeping them in different places and they're there for different reasons and you have different plans for them, then this is how you would keep track of them. That was the basic technology. Every large organization in the world that had this kind of processing requirement had this kind of machinery. You
Question.
look like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we always have a little bit of a delay, so I don't want to interrupt. Um, who, so you said Hollerith was 1880s.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when he was born, or is that when he made the cards? And
No, that was his. He filed the patent in 1884.
got
He
it.
was born in the 1860s,
No, when
and he died in 1829 in 1929 with it.
so let's just so for World War One, were we using these machines?
Oh yeah, every large by World War One, every large enterprise in the world that could afford them. Now they were very expensive,
Sure.
but every large enterprise in the world that had a use for this kind of tracking had these machines.
So it
They were
wasn't
they were not special. They were standard. They
so this wasn't like Manhattan Project.
Oh no.
This was expensive, but you could get your hand. Who makes the machines?
Well, Hollerith had a company that got together in the 1890s with three other companies and formed the Computing Translating Record Machine Company. And in 1924, they hired a new CEO who thought that he hated the name, so they changed it to International Business Machines.
Flows a little better.
Yeah. There were several other players that had different card formats and different specialties, but they were the industry leader for these things from the 1890s until the 1970s when the whole thing became obsolete. There were others, like they had other card formats and everything, but by far the leader. And like for one thing, the U.S. government, if you got a punch card from a government agency, it was an IBM style Hollerith card. Uh, the others were more used internally by big businesses to keep track of inventory or to keep track of their customers and vendors and stuff like that. But government functions were almost all done everywhere in the world using IBM Hollerith cards. And IBM had a sweet racket going. Until the 30s, they wouldn't sell you a machine. They would only lease it to you. You could not own an IBM tabulating machine. In the mid 30s, the courts decided that this was a teensy bit of a violation of the
Monopolistic.
Sherman Antitrust Act, and they made them come up with a different business model. So after that, yeah, one of the terms of your lease was that you had to buy the cards from IBM. Think about that. They only have to build the machine once. They charge you for it every month, but then you're using gazillions of these stupid fucking cards. And that was a big profit center for all of these companies. They were going through like 2 million cards a day at Bletchley Park for the decoding stuff. That's like not even center front stage of the stuff they were doing. But they had some of this equipment at Bletchley Park doing some of the tracking the code stuff. The so what ended up happening though is they started licensing their intellectual property. The design of the card became their currency, the design of the machines. And so there were companies all over the world making compatible equipment and paying IBM license fees. So they were printing the cards and paying IBM license fees for the privilege of printing those cards and for keeping to the specifications and everything. Well, one fine happy day, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and your subsidiary that has been paying IBM these license fees for 10 years is suddenly at war in a country that's at war with the United States. So does that mean you're going to stop making the shit that you're making? Probably not. And don't forget, one of the things that you're licensing is the right to put the IBM logo on the side of the machine that you're making.
Yeah.
So this is why it is totally not surprising that there is IBM equipment, IBM logoed equipment following IBM specifications, keeping track of all this shit in Nazi Germany,
Oh,
because there were probably factories in Germany making
making.
it.
Okay.
And what's the parent company going to do? Okay.
Yeah, you can't go any further than
Obviously,
you can't go any
yeah,
further than war.
you're not going to, you're not going to keep paying the license fee.
Yeah.
But then if you keep making the equipment without paying the license fee, what's IBM going to do? Sue you?
Yeah.
You're freaking war with them.
Yeah. It's like when
So,
people are like, that's an illegal war crime. But you're at war. There's no further
yeah,
enforcement.
exactly. So yes, were these machines being used by the death camps? Of course, they were the bog standard equipment. It would be like asking if they were using electric typewriters or
The
whatever,
Taliban used Nokia cell phones.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that doesn't mean they were aware of it. It's like, your iPhone can be used to trade in child pornography.
Sure.
That's obviously not what Apple would like you to be doing with it.
Got it.
But if you are using it for that, there's not a lot they can do about it either, because anything that they would do to the product to make it less useful for that would also make it less useful for the legitimate purposes that it was designed for. So I find it perfectly believable that IBM in the United States had no idea any of this shit was going down, because actually nobody in the United States knew it was going down until the camps were liberated and everyone went, oh my God. But like I was saying, if you've got millions of people that you've brought from different places or keeping in different places, they're there for different reasons, and you want to keep track of it all, this was the technology of the day. And it was a very mature technology. People don't realize how long this had been going on, but these things were, they had been in production since the previous century when World War II started. So anybody who had the means to have them had them. And there were multiple sources. Now, they didn't know when they made the machine, you were going to be using it to decide who gets Zyklon B for breakfast this morning, but that's one of the things they could be used for. That's just, you know,
There's, uh, I don't know if like one of the most common like trucks that there's like a meme like the CIA is getting ready to do something when pallets of weapons, pallets of unmarked bills, and Toyota Hiluxes appear. It means a coup's happening, and that's just been that's you always see the same pictures in the Middle East. It's the same white pickup truck, and there was actually a dealership in Texas, and it used to be not no, sorry, not a dealership, a private whatever small
yeah, oh yeah,
business.
they traded their truck in. It ended up in
Yeah,
Afghanistan with
it
the
was like
company
Bill.
markings on it. I saw that.
It was like Bill's Plumbing located in Dallas. I want to say this was like 2012, 2013, and he got traded in, and it somehow just in the jet stream of whatever cars, used cars, black ops, deniable operations, this ended up with ISIS, and people saw pictures of this thing on like Facebook,
Yeah.
and they were like, Bill. I never knew Bill supported the caliphate, and he said that he had to like hire his like son-in-law just to deal with the calls every people
Mm.
were canceling contracts because they're like, I don't support a caliphate. And he's like, what the fuck are you talking
The
about?
company that I work for is absolutely fanatical about making sure the decals are removed from any vehicles that we sell because of that incident.
Gee, and I remember that used to be, I think I like screenshotted that article, and that used to be the background of my laptop in college because it would make me
Yeah.
laugh so hard whenever I saw it. But so my own arrogance, ignorance, I thought IBM was a German company. I never knew
Nope.
that was
They were American.
so
Well,
that's the basis of my misunderstanding.
four companies that came together to form IBM. I'm not sure about the other three, but Hollerith himself was definitely an American. He invented the machines for the American census. And a lot of the companies that came into the business were, in fact, European, because they were, this was very high tech for the time, mechanical and electromechanical engineering, and they had, a lot of people who were really good at that stuff. But the basic idea was down to Hollerith, the US guy, and IBM has always been registered in the state of New York. They moved from New York City to some place upstate in the early 20th century. Uh, but yeah, that whole thing is very American.
So that,
And
and I guess there's more irony. There's more poetic irony in
yeah,
that than we'd like to admit. I mean,
now he was a Dutch immigrant.
you could argue a lot of the Third Reich was funded by America, right? DuPont was
Hmm.
didn't Remington, weren't they involved in like floating the Third Reich? Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
little area there.
But yeah, I mean, I've always found it a little amusing that some people are so obsessed with the fact that IBM equipment was used in the death camp, because like
Yeah,
basically the American prison system also used it. Now
yeah,
they weren't killing people deliberately, but it was still just a teeny sliver on the wrong side of maybe the line between good and evil. But this is what that machinery was used for. And before the camps were liberated, even if you knew it was being used to keep track of prisoners, again, that's not out of line,
I
because
gotcha.
they were used for that in the United States and
Yeah,
everywhere else too. It's but what was different about it, of course, was Nazis and the
yeah.
actual uh well, who's going to go to the ovens this morning? And
Well, yeah, no, I mean, one, I get, again, my own ignorance. I didn't even know. I always thought it was, I guess I've just seen it written in German. Is like international, like business, like Maschinen or something. I always thought it
yeah.
was German.
Well, they had I mean, it was a natural thing for German companies to get
Sure.
into, because
Well,
that was their wheelhouse, was making precision mechanical things like this. So it would be very surprising if there weren't a few German subsidiaries making equipment for them. That that's one of the things that they prided themselves on in Germany. There were actually companies all over Europe, in fact, all over the world, who were using and making this machinery, who were printing the cards, who were doing all this stuff under licensure to IBM. And there were other companies too. There were a few others, but none of them were as prominent as IBM. You wouldn't recognize any of their card formats as readily as you would that 80 column card that uh, uh, I used to say, well, everyone recognized an IBM card if they saw it. And I guess that's not really true anymore, because
I
it's
wouldn't.
yeah. But it used to be one of those things, everyone had seen one, because you would get one in the mail from the government and have to go turn it in somewhere, or whatever. That's how everything was kept track of. Uh, of course, that was until computers came along.
Yeah.
And this is where the tale gets more interesting to me, though. So after the war, computers are starting to become a thing. And we talked about this in the big data talk, how originally computers are mainly used to solve mathematical problems because they didn't have enough memory to handle text. A computer that could hold all the information on a Hollerith card in its random access memory was not a thing that even existed until the late 50s, early 60s. And then they were very specialized. But the thing about the computer is that it could do in one step what these sorting machines, these tabulating machines would take. You would literally have this dance, this choreography of taking stacks of cards from one machine to the next in order to do ever more elaborate processing with them. But with a computer, you could just read the stack of cards through and have all the processing
Right.
done and make a new stack of
In a
cards.
one-stop shop.
Right. But what you did have was the cards were not necessarily an optimal thing to be an input output data storage device for computers, but they were because it was an existing mature technology. Like I said, it was a simple, straightforward matter to take a tabulating machine and turn it into an input device for a computer. It was a simple thing to take a card punch and turn it into an output device for a computer. It was a simple thing to take the same handling arrangements, the trays, the file cabinets, the the tools for moving stacks of cards around. All of these things existed, and it was a mature technology before the computers came along. So it was just a matter of taking the readers and punches and marrying them to the computer, and you still had all of this existing technology for dealing with the cards. Only now you could do a lot more with them, because instead of this simple electromechanical device that you're running the cards through, you're running them through a computer that can do really wicked, complicated stuff.
Mm.
So that's why punch cards are associated with computers. I am just old enough to have had to use a key punch machine to make Hollerith cards, because when I took computer science intro in 1980, I was part of the last class that my university had where we had to do our assignments by making punch cards at the little typewriter that made the cards, put a rubber band around it, hand it in at the desk, come back an hour later and get the printout from our program being run. And if it said error in line 72, then you did the whole thing again. And that was how I took intro to computer science in college. It was such a pain in the ass that I did all of my assignments on my home computer first in BASIC instead of Fortran, and then I converted them to Fortran because it was such a pain in the ass. But that was the state of the art throughout the pretty much through the mid 1970s. It was finally starting to eclipse around 1980. Uh, in the It was around 1960 that they started moving a lot of that data onto magnetic tape instead of Hollerith cards. And that's because the tape is more compact. It can be reused, unlike the Hollerith cards that, okay, we had to make a new set because this one has the field wrong. You could do things like sorting. You could do more complicated stuff much more quickly. And then, of course, in the 70s, disk drives. There were disk drives in the 60s. They were very specialized, esoteric research devices. The world's first Winchester hard disk was 6 feet in diameter and had a capacity of 5 megabytes.
Oh, I've seen pictures of that. I've seen them loading it onto I think a
Yeah,
plane.
it was vertical format. Yeah, so it
Yeah.
looked like this enormous wheels,
Yeah, I've
six
seen
feet in
pictures. Yeah,
diameter.
it
Um,
looks like an early A bomb.
and these things used massive amounts of electricity and power, and just like they could rip you from limb if you got too close to them when the safety devices didn't work. Uh, you may have heard of the series *Halt and Catch Fire*, which is a cable TV series about the early microcomputer industry. Well, it's actually pretty good. It's fairly true to its historical facts, but it fictionalizes a few things. And in the series intro, in uh, the introduction to each episode, the usual thing, they have the voiceover, mentions the existence of a computer instruction called halt and catch fire, which would stop the program and cause the computer to catch on fire. Well, that was fictionalized. The reality behind it was that there was a Unix error message for the Unix operating system. There was an error message that read printer on fire. And the reason for that was these line printers that I described to you with the spinning wheel, the 130 spinning wheels, and they would spin really fast, stop when they stop, clomp, and then go and do the next line, clomp. And they had a ribbon the width of the piece of paper, and of course the paper itself, all of which is flammable. And every once in a while, the ribbon would catch and it would stop advancing. And because they were dumping so much energy into it, within a few seconds, it would catch on fire. So there was a sensor for this. And when that sensor actuated, the printer would issue this error message that would be displayed for the operator that would say printer on fire.
Good Lord. Yeah.
Yeah, things, changed an awful lot. And and again, no, that's probably not the best way to do it. For one thing, those printers didn't have lowercase characters. And you could also see little jiggerings in the position of the characters on the printout because they were operating so fast
Yeah.
that they didn't really register the vertical position of the character that accurately. They were
Yeah.
just more in, to get it on the paper and then get to the next line.
Gotcha.
All of this was redone in the 70s
So,
to using more reasonable techniques.
so it seems like these machines are, because as I asked earlier, I was like, who builds the machines? How do you even make something that complex? And then I realized, like, well, it's really just a birth from the industrial revolution and like
Mhm.
textile, from like wooden looms to
Yeah.
like metal. So it's really, if you want to go back, you got to go back 200 years before like the
Yeah.
Hollerith
In
machine.
fact, if you look up punched card, you'll see everyone starts their article with the Joachim loom, which the looms used punch cards to define the weaving
Uh,
patterns.
so
So what Hollerith didn't really invent the punched card. What he invented was the punched card as a storage for data, as opposed to a control mechanism for a machine.
got it.
Uh,
Okay.
so yeah, this was all the kind of stuff that was becoming everywhere at the end of the 19th century. And it was all mechanical. It all involved really clever mechanical engineering, and uh, the electronics was mostly just as a bunch of switches in series or not. Uh, like I said, they mostly were programmed by a plug board, like the old telephone exchange. In fact, that was a technology that was invented for telephone exchanges and adapted to this whole thing. But it's not, there was no microprocessor, there was no computer in there. But what it was when the card was read by the bed of pins sensor, if the right switches were in series, they would make a circuit. And that would tell the machine to do something different with that card than it would with the other cards that didn't make the circuit. That's all it was.
Hmm.
Everything else about him, though, was material handling,
Just very intricate.
handling the cards, moving the sensor in and out, moving the bits, moving the cards back and forth. Okay, that's all mechanical. That was all these machines were. And that, again, that's why there were other companies making them. There were no tremendous secrets involved to how they worked. Uh,
Okay, I got you. Hey, Roger, I'm gonna go grab a blanket and use the restroom. It's your podcast.
okay. Um, as Tommy mentioned, this is his favorite book about humans going past the singularity and interesting things happening. If you would like a paper copy of it like this, then I encourage you to get it from lulu.com, Lulu.com. You can get it from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of the usual suspects. It'll be the same price. But if you get it from Lulu, they're the publisher of origin and they give me the money that would normally go to Amazon and the book distribution chain. So, and it's a big difference. It's like $6 instead of $1.50. So, on the other hand, if you've got a gift card or something and, or you just, you have Prime or whatever, go ahead and get it through Amazon then. I get by far most of my revenue from this from Amazon just because so many people do business with them. And also, if you want an ebook version, particularly for your Kindle, but even any of the others, it doesn't matter there. Those, in fact, there, Amazon is pretty much the publisher of origin for your Kindle version. So that's fine too. Um, the uh, the cover of the Kindle version is different. My wife said that one doesn't thumbnail very well. Uh, But anyway, that's the plug that I usually do when Tommy is off doing whatever. Um, this turns out to be a rather interesting topic, though. I've got another thing that I want to go into the transition from pre-computer to post-computer stuff involved a lot of pre-computer stuff in the post-computer era. And that's one of the things that kept computers so expensive for the first couple of decades, is that they were using all of this hyper expensive office equipment. And it took a couple of decades for the industries making more reasonable equipment to get up to speed, to become as mature as those pre-computer data industries were. So, people were still using the stupidly expensive crap that was, you needed a data center for in the 1970s. And the need for it had pretty much disappeared. But the problem is that those machines were in production. They were readily available. There was infrastructure to support them. You could get the ribbons and the fan fold paper and the cards and all that stuff. And it took a while for other technologies to become as well established so that you could get the materials so that they could be serviced and all this could be done with them. So it was like in 1975 or six, my dad ordered a printer for his lab, because I've mentioned several times that my first computer that I had access to was the HP 2100 mini computer in my father's physics lab at Southern University in New Orleans. Well, they couldn't afford any of these massive scale printers and shit. So my dad ordered a Heathkit. It was like $450 for a 9-pin dot matrix printer that would only print on fan fold paper. But that was a technology that was just becoming established. If you had a large enough company to afford the old school stuff, that's what you bought, because that's what you were familiar with. You had people who could work on it. You had vendors, you had suppliers. The new stuff had to get up to speed before it could become the basis of an entire industry. Laser printers didn't exist. Xerox machines did, and they worked by entirely optical techniques. So it took a while for people to figure out how to use that technology to make a printer instead of a copier. All this was going on in the 70s. The transition from old non-computer tech that had been glued onto computer systems to stuff that was more appropriate for a computer system, especially when microcomputers came along, because none of this big shit was appropriate to a computer that you could put on a desktop. And those existed starting in the early 70s. The HP 2100 itself was a mini computer. It used a lot of electricity. It was the size of a dorm refrigerator. It cost $40,000, but it also sat on a lab, basically on a lab bench. It didn't take up like a rack, with the data center stuff and the floor that you could pull with all the cables and stuff. That was all becoming unnecessary. And then, of course, by 1980, anybody who wanted one could have a pretty darn capable computer that plugged into your TV set, and you could actually do useful stuff with it. And you're not going to have $100,000 line printer for that $600 computer. Now, having mentioned all that, there is another technology that is completely unrelated that went through the same trajectory, and that's paper tape.
I think you've actually read my mind, because the question I was going to ask before I went, I tried to find a blanket. I couldn't find it. And I realized it was in the dryer. So I'm an idiot. I was looking around for it. I was like, but I was going to ask, and I think this answers my question, is before the jump in the 70s, at any moment in the prior 90 years, did the cards undergo transformations like more than 960 pins, or like and then I think you're answering that with paper.
Yeah. The actual IBM format card that everyone from a certain era would recognize was designed in 1926. So it was a standard that existed 10 year, 15 years before World War II started. And it became pretty much the world standard for public use because it was the IBM format. Like I said, there were others that predated it that had fewer columns. A couple of them had more columns. Uh, they had some more specialized functions that they were designed to encode and all. But for the things that you would see if you were a member of the public and your government or your bank or your car dealership gave you a Hollerith card, it was going to be an IBM format card with the 960 potential, hold positions. But paper tape was a completely different thing because that was originated for the telegraph industry. And it's even older than the cards.
What?
Yeah. So when they started laying telegraph lines, let me see something here. I made a couple of notes here. When was that? Okay. Yeah. So the Baudot code, Baudot, that's a guy's name. Okay. Uh, he patented that in the 1870s. And the purpose of that was if you have gone to the trouble to lay a cable at the bottom of the ocean or to string a cable across the country, you don't want that cable to be idle. So, this romantic thing that you think
Idle?
of, hmm?
You don't want it to be idle?
You don't want it to be idle. You don't want it to just be sitting there not transmitting data.
Not making money.
Right.
Okay.
Not doing anything.
Sorry. I thought you meant like physically not moving. I was like, that's exactly what you want.
Well, they don't move it. Yeah, but you didn't want
Sorry.
it sitting there not actually being in use.
I'm a moron. Sorry. Continue.
So you have this romantic image of the guy at the telegraph office sitting there with the clicker and the Morse code key
Yeah.
sending messages for people. That was true for about 5 minutes. Honestly, one of the first things that happened was this guy, Emile Baudot, French guy, invented a different encoding, not Morse code, that can be more easily sent and read by machines. It's what they called an asynchronous serial code. And the idea was that instead of a human operator sitting there punching out the message, which means you have these delays where you're not, you know, you're thinking about how to do the next character and all, you would use a machine to send it. So you would get the maximum speed. And what you would have is you would have, just like you have the key punch machine that makes cards, you would have a teletype machine that you type in and makes a paper tape that has holes in it representing each of the characters that you typed. Baudot was a 5-bit code, which meant there was 5 holes that represented each character that you typed. And it could represent the alphabet, the numerics, and a few control codes like end of line. So you would sit there, you wouldn't actually have a human being on the line sending a message. You would have the human being at the teletype machine composing the message and making a paper tape. And when you were done, you would give that to the operator and he would queue it up so that when the last message finished, that one would start, no delay. That way, you are maximizing usage of this line that you spent millions of dollars to build.
It's so like I was telling Roger beforehand, Sunday's the day I clean my apartment, I clean the sheets from my bed, and I move all of this week's podcasts to an external hard drive that I put in the gun safe. And those are all things that I just have to start and then they run. And each of them on their own maybe takes like an hour. But so like today's Sunday, so the first thing I do when I get up, unlike any other day where I just immediately go to the gym, is I go grab the hard drive, I plug it in, drag and drop 300 gigabytes. I rip everything off the bed instead of making it, dump it all in the dryer or washer and put it on like heavy duty. And then I'll normally like open the porch door and let like fresh air in because I know I'm gonna be like cleaning with like disinfectants. Those are all, and it takes like an hour for it to like passively, you can feel the temperature going up, and it's just because trying to get all the, get some clean air in here. But those are all things that I just have to start, and then I go about my, and now it's all going on in the background. So that's kind of it, except with the profit. Is that
Yeah. Well,
accurate?
yeah, it was entirely profit motive because the more messages you can send over that line, you spent a certain amount of money to build
Build
that
that
line.
line.
And if it's an undersea cable, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
every millisecond that that line is not transmitting data is lost money.
Yeah.
So this was all part of making sure to minimize the unused spaces in the line's timeline so that you were always using it to send data and not having it just sit there and go, what's the next character? Um, so this technology was even older than Hollerith cards. Uh, in the 1960s, in fact, right around the time I was born, the American Standards Institute, ANSI, decided that Baudot was a little dated, and they came up with a new code called ASCII, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange, which is what we largely still use today. And it was a 7-bit code, and they often sent 8 bits so that the eighth bit would be an error detecting bit. Uh, they would arrange that the eighth bit would make sure that the total number of on bits was either odd or even. And if that wasn't the case, then you would know something went wrong and you didn't get the right character. That standard ended up becoming the basis of like the Model 33 teletype machine, which you see in some of the early James Bond films, which you see like all of news services used. And again, it was, telegraph lines. You would have the news agencies sending messages back and forth. And at the heart of it all was paper tape. A teletype machine almost always would have a tape punch reader. It would have 8 pins that could sense the tape to see what it is, and that would allow it to type the character. So you could take the tape and put it in the reader and run it, and the teletype would type the message so a human being could read it.
Mm.
Or you could sit there typing a message and it would make the tape. That was the basic purpose of a teletype machine. You could connect the teletype machine directly to the transmission line to have it print messages as they come in. That was done. But you would almost never use that teletype to send messages unless it was like some kind of screaming emergency where you didn't have time to make a tape and put it in the reader and let it go at its maximum speed, which at the time was about 10 characters per second. So that technology also got co-opted for computers. When my dad got the computer in his physics lab, the interface, the human user interface was a Model 33 teletype machine. So that computer was interactive. So we could sit there typing shit into it, and the computer would be receiving what I typed and acting on it. But I could also run a tape, like, I could have it type my program out and make a tape of it so that when after they finish using the computer for something else, I could put my program back into it. Or I could have the computer send the output to the tape to be printed later or used in some different ways. And again, not optimal. There was a lot of infrastructure, but because of the telegraph industry, the tapes were standard, the readers were standard, the punches were standard, handling mechanisms were standard. One of the things I remember is that you would have like the basic interpreter, fairly long program. It was 8 kilobytes. All right. That was a roll of paper about that big in diameter, an inch thick, 1 inch tape, about 4 inches in diameter. It looked like a roll of electrical tape, only a little bigger. Only it's not adhesive. So heaven help you if the middle falls out of the roll.
Oh God. Yeah.
And we had a little machine which actually started life as an electric pencil eraser that you would normally put an eraser into to erase things, but we had a reel for it that was designed to roll up inch-wide paper tape. So you would take the tape, put it around it, hit the button, and just spool it up, and you would see the roll growing as it comes off. So you would actually put, when we got the optical reader, the tape would just fly through this reader and end up in a giant puddle on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And we would catch the end of the tape and then put it in the winder and suck up the puddle of tape on the floor into a into the
Yeah.
roll on the thing. It's like that was like totally standard, man. Uh, Again, this was equipment that you wouldn't have in your home. Each of these machines cost thousands of dollars in the early 1970s, but they existed. They were established technology. They were mature. And so the handling for the tapes, the tape itself, all of this stuff existed. It didn't have to be designed from scratch, from the
That
ground up.
thousands
Uh,
of dollars and $70s dollars.
yes.
All right.
The computer was $40,000 in 1974, and it
Okay.
didn't have a user interface. You're talking about something the size of a dorm refrigerator. It had, I think it had 8 kilobytes of RAM when they first bought it for that. And it ran at 175 kilohertz, not megahertz. It had magnetic core RAM, which was kind of cool because you turn the computer off and then come back 2 weeks later and turn it on. It would pick up running whatever program it was running, just as if nothing had happened.
Just like,
You might lose one character that was in the
yeah.
buffer and the going out to the teletype machine, uh, but it weighed about 150 pounds and it cost $40,000. And you couldn't use it for anything unless you also bought some peripherals. So
I always love pulling up inflation calculators. 1974.
$40,000. Oh yeah, it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
today.
Um, in 1974, I purchased an item for call it 40. The same item would cost. That doesn't make sense. It would cost $29 now.
I think you did something wrong.
Oh no. Sorry, it would cost 240.
Yeah.
So 40,000 is $250,000 today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you got to remember too, you're talking about a machine that weighed nearly 200 pounds.
Oh, it's
I
not.
mean,
No, it's not even like it's like a fit gaming PC now. It's like no, $250,000. So that's like another whole form of inflation. Not inflation, but
yeah.
like
Well, that's the Moore's Law thing coming
yeah,
in.
it's like if you look up Carnegie and Rockefeller's net worth, they were both worth like $350 billion. No, Rockefeller's worth 410. But there's this whole other level where you have to go look at the cumulative size of the U.S. economy,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you calculate that as a fraction of the economy, it's the
Yeah.
equivalent of I think Rockefeller would be right now would be I want to say it'd be something he'd be worth like 6.1 trillion
Yeah.
in terms of relative like.
Because of a percentage of the overall GDP.
So what you would think about like a Musk and a Bezos now, and all of a sudden it starts to make sense when you go, yeah, J.P. Morgan bailed out the government. You go, oh, I get it now, right? It'd be like if Musk was worth 35 trillion. You go, oh. Before I rudely interrupted you, um, question about so it's not that like paper tape replaced punch cards. It seems like that's more of a
It was used for a different function.
it seems like communication.
Yeah. Well, it has different strengths. And I actually, both cards and paper tape were used to store programs, but they had different strengths for being processed later when you read them back in. So cards could do things like being kicked out and restored and all. Paper tape was linear. Uh, Paper tape was more compact, though, for doing things like, that basic interpreter, 8 kilobyte program on a roll like that. That would have been a stack of cards that high, okay, maybe even taller.
Gotcha.
The cards were very well designed for data, for data where you would have a line of data per card. The tape was better for random linear information, such as a computer program or a stream of data. Again, these were things, they came from different original uses and they were adapted for computers because they existed. It was easier to adapt to those things than it was to come up with something new that was more appropriate for computers. The first thing that came around that was new and was adapted more for computers was magnetic tape. And I know that you have seen pictures of old movies where you had the big tape drives, the reel to reel tapes and the thing. And of course, that was something that also previously existed because of audio recording, but it hadn't been used for data before.
Could it be said that not perfectly, but could you almost use it could you almost use them together? Like, you have data on this end for the IBM
Oh, they
thing,
did.
and you're like, I'll edit and export the video using my iMac, which can do it 100 times faster than, like, YouTube could, but then I'll
Mhm.
go upload it on BitChute, and you can watch it on BitChute.
Yeah, that was exactly what they did. You would have a
Got it,
data processing center,
got it.
and there would be a big computer at the middle of it. Okay. But there would be all these different peripherals that had different strengths. And it wasn't really until the 1980s that it became common for one of those peripherals to be a terminal that you would sit at and interact with the computer in real time, because that's wasteful. Every moment that that computer is waiting for you to type the next key is a moment that it's not doing something.
Got it.
So you had multitasking. This is what drove multitasking operating systems. So you would have 20 of these terminals waiting for people to punch the next key. And then meanwhile, while they're waiting for the next key to be punched, they would be doing other tasks in the
Mhm.
background. So that just like the telegraph line, that CPU is never idle. It's never just sitting there waiting for
Just eat
somebody to do
eating
something.
money, yeah.
Yeah. Now, today we're used to that. In microcomputers, it was very common to turn the computer on and it would sit there in a little loop waiting for you to to type the next key. But that's because that was a $500 computer and not a $40,000 computer or a $4 million computer or $1 billion computer in a data center. So uh, that is, in fact, the really modern computers like these actually are going back a little bit because they spend a lot of their time doing stuff that we're not aware of when we're not actively doing something. Uh, in fact, a lot of the times what they're doing is inimical to our interests because it's something Microsoft or Apple wants or some
Yeah.
malware or whatever.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
don't notice it because the computer is got all of this free time on its hands. If it's not dealing with us, that it can be doing other stuff. Uh, in the 70s, you used to pay for your computer usage by the instruction cycle.
Jesus.
They would literally have a dedicated part of the computer that kept track of how many instruction cycles each account
Good
used
lord. That's like
because
it's like getting charged by, like, Ubisoft for, frame rates used in, like, a game of Ghost Recon.
it is. It
Oof,
was exactly like that. Uh,
the original microtransaction.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons for some of the math goof ups that I've explained to people because uh, they don't teach finite math anymore, and you have single precision math, which is absolutely crap. Uses 4 bytes to store a number. The number is good to about 1 part in a million in the mantissa. You very quickly reach a point when you add 1 to the number, nothing happens because the floating point number has gotten to where it can't represent 1 anymore because of the exponent. Then you have double precision math, which uses 8 bytes to represent a number. And that's got plenty of precision. You can that works well for almost any real world problem. The problem is that when these libraries were written, you had to pay for your computing time by the cycle. And it takes 4 times as many cycles to do a computation on a double precision number. So one of the things they don't teach in floating point math anymore is that the fraction 1 divided by 10 in binary is infinitely repeating, like the fraction 1 divided by 3 is in decimal. So if you're using binary math, which most modern computers do, then 1 divided by 10 times 10, if you don't round it off, is going to come back as 0.9999999 out to the point where it got truncated. So you have to round off your result. Otherwise, it don't look right. And the noobs who learned after the 1990s don't realize these math routines were all written in the 1970s. And when they wrote the floating point, when they wrote the single precision routines, they knew they were crap. So they automatically round off. They keep extra bits and they round off after every step. But the double precision routines were a lot more expensive, literally more expensive to run. So they figured you would probably want to wait until you had done a series of calculations and then tell it to round off yourself. Well, that assumes you know that you need to round them off. I have seen some absolute clusterfucks because young programmers did not know that just because you are using double precision math doesn't mean it's going to come out right if you don't take some precautions.
Is there not any like automatic safeguard put in that would just cut it off as opposed to saying 1 divided by 10 is 0.100000000?
There are now, mainly because so many problems happened from that in the 90s and aughts. So like, JavaScript and the more modern languages, I think they're doing that now. But for a while, it was just like, no, this is C under the hood, and it's all, this is how it works. And if you don't know that's how it works, you're going to get into trouble. And so people got into serious trouble. I mean, you have a scale or a cash register or something like that that people expect to be exact, and the pennies don't add up.
Yeah.
People don't like that.
People don't like when you fuck with the money.
So, yeah, we have a scale that's counting by 0.2, and every once in a while you get an odd number in the least significant digit. People notice that it ain't
Yeah.
right. So that was one
Yeah.
of the things that happened.
Yeah, don't round up when I'm getting gas. Don't round up and assume I got 9. Don't tell me I got 10 gallons when I got no fucker. Give me that extra tenth of a
Yeah,
gallon.
it's like, what happened to my extra tenth of a gallon here? It's like, oh no, it's really there. It just got truncated and
You know, yeah,
got rounded down. So
yeah.
yeah,
Go buy a 12 pack and tell me if you're okay with getting 11 beers. Of
yeah.
the fuck you are.
Well, you got
I'm getting
11.999 beers.
well, no, sir. I'm getting properly shit faced
There's
tonight.
a
I'm getting
scratch on the 12th can.
fuck right off. But yeah, okay, that makes sense then. Another question. Back to like the cape. What it for the paper trail, the telegraph. What's the speed? What's the speed of the message along the cable?
The standard when it was all electromechanical was 110 baud, which is about 10 characters per second.
No. I mean, like between two geographic points.
Well, it's the speed of light.
It's the speed of light. Okay, well
Yeah.
That's what I figured the default. Whenever I'm not sure, I assume it's that. I just
Yeah.
wasn't sure, like if it was.
Yeah, it's not like it takes time for the message to get from there to here. That wasn't an issue until satellites.
I got okay, I got you. Well, it's just like it's sometimes it's not things like you think of, like the human nervous system.
Yeah.
Some people just go, oh, it's the speed of light. No, your nervous system moves at like I want to say it's like
Oh yeah, it's a lot
600
slower.
it's like 600 meters a second, which is fast when it's going from your nose to your eye. But in terms of actual speed, it's slow as shit.
No, the limit on telegraph systems is generally capacitance in the lines, which causes them to be a little slow to respond to changes. And that limits it doesn't limit the speed at which the signal reaches its destination, but it limits the time it takes to reach the potential at the other end.
I got you.
So yeah, you can get, the signal reaches there essentially instantly, but if you try changing it too fast and sending too much data, then it starts to get garbled. So that was the limit.
That's such a head fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the 1870s and 80s, they were using speed of light technology.
Yeah, well, it's called electricity.
Well, yeah, well, I know, but you and I, we don't think anything of it, right? It's just like, of course, it goes that fast. But there's no other.
That was taken for granted that radio and electricity went at the speed of light, and the idea that there was a latency didn't become an issue until
our hyper connected world of
until satellites.
Yeah,
because the time it takes a signal to travel halfway around the world is pretty insignificant.
Yeah.
It's like 100th of a second. But the time it takes the signal to go to geosynchronous orbit and back is a
Yeah.
significant fraction of a second. And if you're trying to use that
36,000.
to play a game, then you start to notice it.
Yeah. Or
And where it really became noticeable was during the Apollo missions when
yeah.
they did not get a good picture of the lunar lander taking off until Apollo 17, the very last chance. And part of the problem is that there is a 3 second delay between signals coming from the moon to the earth and going back to the moon. So you've got this poor sucker. I've read the story about how they pulled it off to get that shot, the money shot of Apollo 17's
Taking.
LEM
Yeah.
taking off and tracking it as it rose. The guy pretty much had to practice for weeks, knowing that what he's looking at
Is not hat.
is
Wow.
not that happened 3 seconds ago.
Oh, whoa. That's a
and he's
yeah.
here basically programming the servos that are on the lunar rover and its camera. That's what captured that video. And so he's trying to. It's like, and I think they tried it on 16 and it didn't work. And so it was like, but they didn't have the automation they do today. Nowadays, you would just program a computer to do it.
To
It's like,
yeah.
yeah,
That's it's
but
like
they didn't have that in 1974.
it's kind of like in there's this game I was playing on my Xbox last year. I think it's just called Battleship. Or it's really, I mean, you're really just kind of, you're going from like these 1880s battleships. I mean, it's not like a top that it's like a great, immersive 3D, HDR, fucking great physics. But it's fun because you get up to where you get the final. It's like you finally grinded all these hours. You're getting, man, I might download that game. I'm actually, hold on, I'm gonna make a note of that. I think I'm gonna I've downloaded. I forgot about that. I was playing it right when I moved into this apartment. But you finally get up to where you're at like the IO class. And it is great because you can turn on different difficulty levels to like if you're just playing easy like me, you can kind of just go God's eye view across the map and see where whatever the German
Yeah.
ship is. But as you play more difficult, it's all just about like where you're getting hit from. So it's like you can like see there's like an artificial trail on like the shells. So you
Mm-hmm.
see them and like so you're like we got to start turning now to miss it. But at the same time, you're like, where did that come from? I got to fire back 18 miles, which means it's going to take 10 seconds to hit it. So you're like, which actually means I gotta lead it by this much. But by the time I'm seeing them, that means they've already. So there was this weird double thing where you're
Mm-hmm.
like lead them and then lead them again, and every once in a while it'd be like direct hit, and it was
Yeah,
just
and that
total
was
dopamine hit.
one of the things I was thinking about. I ran across when I was putting together the ideas for this talk is gunnery tables.
Yeah, that's what the
Because
first computers were. Were you for?
yeah, and those were analog computers. They
Yeah,
weren't Turing complete computers, but they were purpose designed to solve the equation for if you fire it at this angle and this speed and this propellant charge and this weight of projectile, where is it going to land? Because in the heat of battle, you don't have time to solve equations and shit. And
yeah,
they didn't have calculators then. So they would have pre calculated all of these
yeah,
things. So your captain would roll down and tell you the range. And then you would use these gunnery tables to figure out what to do with the gun to make sure the shell would hit where you thought it needed to. During World War One, it was all eyeballs,
yeah,
and at the beginning of World War Two, it was mostly eyeballs. At the beginning of World War Two, the Germans were dragging their artillery around with horses,
yeah.
and that was true through half of the war. There is a really interesting book titled Soldat, German for soldier, by one of the German soldiers who was just he was an artillery gunman who he was promoted to an officer like 2 days before the end of the war, and he got captured by the Russians.
Oh,
Uh,
jeez.
but he got very, very lucky, and he ended up getting out of the POW camp in Russia and getting out of East Germany just in time, and eventually made his way to the United States in the 60s and wrote this book about his experiences. And that was one of his big things. So the first half of World War II for him, being an artillery guy, half of it was taking care of the horses
Yeah,
in Germany.
yeah,
And he said it was a major change when they got motorized artillery, because it's like before you would spend hours taking care of the horses, feeding them, grooming them, doing all of this horse care shit. But with the motorized artillery, you just turn the key off, go to bed, get up the next morning, go back, turn the key on, and you're on your way. And that was a huge advance. And this was fucking Germany. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, they're famous for all the jet engines and all this
Yeah.
shit and all. And in 1940, they're still dragging their artillery around with horses in a lot of the theater. So,
That's so insane.
and it pointed out that we probably would have been doing it too, except that it wouldn't have been practical for us to ship horses from the Americas to Europe. So we had to come up with something else. And we did. So,
Yeah.
yeah, because we had to. The
Yeah.
Germans didn't have to. They had, what are we talking about? An established infrastructure that
Yeah.
was based around taking care of the horses, but it existed. Even though something better was possible, doing the something better would take time, it would take more investment, it would take training, it would take, you know, all of this investment they didn't have time for. So what did they do? They sent their guys out with the teams of horses dragging cannons around. That is basically what was happening in the 60s with computers, is they were taking all of this expensive hyper specialized shit from the tabulating machines, where that was the only way to make these things, and they were adapting it to computers, whereas the computers could really do things that were much more subtle if they needed to, but the infrastructure wasn't there for machines that were more efficient and less power hungry and less noisy and less likely to catch on fire and shit like that. So uh, that that whole era was a transition where people had an image of how computers worked, say in 1970, much of which had nothing to do with computers. It had to do with this office equipment technology, that the office equipment was going away because you weren't going to spend $100,000 on a tabulating machine if you could spend that same $100,000 on an actual computer and it be much more versatile and capable. But you were using the same IO devices because they were in production. The supplies were available. The maintenance was available. The technicians were trained to work on them, and so on and so forth. And it took close to 20 years for that to shift over to more appropriate things.
It's one of those weird things where, yeah, Annie Jacobson talks about it in her book, The Pentagon's Brain, about DARPA, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
how the computer comes. That's what they called the people because they computed the gunnery tables. They are
Yeah,
a
well,
computer.
before World War II, computer was not a machine; it was a job description.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's and then yeah, it goes into John von Neumann, and then they were
Yeah.
like, "Hey, he's got this idea for a computer. They're like, let's use it for gunnery tables." And they're like, we got another idea," and it was to do the generations
The
of atoms during the fusion.
hydrogen
For,
bomb. Yeah.
yeah, but it's kind of wild thinking about like the horses or even the punch cards. In World War One, we used peach cores because they were suitable enough as a form of filter for gas masks. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
perfect, but in terms of mass production, so
You
there's
could get
this
them
weird
easily. Yeah.
so there's this weird thing where all of a sudden, like, if you could grow peaches, like, you were now, like, an asset of the military industrial complex, but it's just weird because then you also go back. Richard Rhodes talks about it in his book Energy, how, like, big, mature forests were, like, guarded by, like, soldiers in, like, 17 or 16, 17, 1800s Europe or, England, because those were used for ships for the Queen's
Mm-hmm.
Navy. So it was like, that was big. There was no, like, national park shit. It was like, that's
Yeah,
like trying
that's
to
a
sneak in
reason.
air. That's Area 51. Like bullshit.
Yeah.
You're going in there. We don't know.
Yeah.
Are you a foreign agent? Are you gonna go spike it with salt or something? Like
That's a military resource. Yes.
fucking wild. But Roger, I gotta pee again real quick, and then I can still run for like another 30 minutes after this.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
I've been.
whatever.
I normally don't drink a monster during the podcast, but I did, and it's just running right through me.
Hmm.
Not that you asked, and not that anyone else asked, but you know, it's
It
what
is
it
what it
is.
is.
It is what it is.
Um, okay, so I already suggested where to get my book. Also, all of the other stuff that I've written, including The Curators, which I am currently in the middle of reading for Tommy when we're not doing this kind of episode, is also available through my personal website at localroger, LOCALROGER.com. It is free if you don't mind reading it through a web browser. Uh, some of it is available from Amazon as ebooks. A couple of things are also available, like Mopi, as paper printed books, not as much of it. Um, but for a long time in the aughts, I wrote fairly prolifically for the discussion site corrosion.org. That's spelled KURO digit 5 HIN, because the site's founder was named Rusty Foster, and it sounds like corrosion. Uh, and it was a very interesting and vibrant community until it kind of fell apart in the teens because uh, it was invaded by trolls, and it was sort of an experiment in free expression. And it turns out when you let people express themselves freely without any kind of moderation, they turn into assholes. So the people generating quality content, including myself, eventually sort of either drifted away or stopped producing the content. But in the heyday, say from 2000 through 2007 or 8, there was some really fantastic stuff there. And I am proud to have been the author of some of it. And some of that is available on my website. So check it out.
Damn right it is. Um, so what was the final push or metamorphosis, if I do say, of the punch card and the Hollerith machines to
It became disk drives.
what was the jump to how does it
The original, yeah, well, it moved to paper tape in the early 60s, paper tape, to magnetic tape rather, because magnetic tape can be reused and it can be processed in different ways. In fact, if you take older computer science sources actually had sorting algorithms that can be used with magnetic tape as a specialty, because you can't do random access, but you can read and write little segments of it right there. So there was a whole discipline of data processing around using magnetic tape, but then it switched to disks, and the first practical disks, magnetic disks, started to show up in the late 60s and early 70s, and they were stupidly expensive. I had a fun experience, which we can go over sometime. In the late 90s, one of these early disk drives went, someone donated one to the Goodwill store in Covington. And it showed up, it's the size of a washing machine and probably weighed about 300 pounds. And it sat there for a year with a price tag that said $250. This was a machine that probably cost close to $100,000 in 1974. One day, well, it was after Christmas, I went to the store and I saw they had crossed out 250 and changed it to 15. And so I looked at Elaine and I was like, I can't resist. So I got out my 15 bucks, went to the desk, and then I went to the U-Haul place and spent $30 to rent a trailer so I could get it home.
good lord.
And I spent the weekend taking it apart. Unfortunately, they didn't have YouTube then or phones with video cameras in them, so I don't really have any records of it. I still have some of the parts. That thing was so massively overbuilt to support what they call it supported what they called a layer cake disc. It had a removable disc cartridge that was the size of a cake. It had like 10 layers, 10 discs, and it had this head that went back and forth on a ball bearing roller glider. And what moved the head was this voice coil about that big in diameter and about that long, the magnetic winding that was inserted into this permanent magnet that weighs 70 pounds. And this was all, and that was just the mechanic. Oh, and it had an optical glass track thing that would read which track it was positioned on, uh, so that the electronics could tell when it had put the head in the right position. And it had a capacity of 80 megabytes. And like I said, this thing probably cost around $100,000 in the early 70s. And I just took the thing apart, and it was like, I still have, it's like I have a bench over there that's made from some of the side panels because they're all steel. I've got a few of the parts that I kept. Just I have the magnet. One of these days I'll drag it in. Like I said, it weighs 70 pounds.
Don't get it too close to the computer.
It's not it's not like, it won't be a problem.
Yeah.
For one thing, this computer doesn't have a disk drive.
So there's some real like craftsmanship to it. There's some real
Oh,
like
there was. It was
like
awesome.
steampunk industrial kind of craftsmanship.
There was. It was an enormous amount of mechanical
Yeah.
engineering went into building this stuff. And once they got it to work, then it started to shrink.
Yeah.
So by the end of the 70s, you had 8-inch floppy disks in the mid 70s, then you had 5 1/4, then you had 3.5-inch floppy disks, which became the standard pretty
Mm-hmm.
much through the 90s.
Mm-hmm. I remember
And
those.
yeah, then you had hard drives. The original one was like, looked like a submarine, an accessory for a submarine, and those started to shrink until I had one that was manufactured in 1984 that was 10 megabytes, and it weighed about 15 pounds. It was a self-contained external assembly. Uh,
I've got
then
100 terabytes right here.
yeah,
That's
the
maybe weighs 10 pounds.
the technology has just gradually improved. Why? Because the infrastructure gradually became mature for those technologies, and they started to improve. So that moved us away from these less perfect things that had been adapted from a completely different industry.
Swiss watch machines.
Yeah, the telegraph and the old, and the unit process equipment technologies, where price didn't matter. What mattered was that it was reliable, and that because you didn't care how much it cost because of what you were using it for. If it replaces 10 employees,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if it costs $100,000. They're moving away from that to things that were more affordable for individual people or for desk stations. Uh, the IBM PC was a big leap, mainly because it was what convinced industry that desktop class devices had a use in industry. Before that, everyone in the industry had the mindset that you had computers in the white room with all the air conditioners and the technicians and shit, and you had terminals out where the operators were on their desks. IBM introduced the idea that you could have a fully functional, self contained computer on someone's desktop as a business device, not as a toy.
There's some beautiful symbolism there of
Yeah.
like Martin Luther moving away from like the again, dare I say, like the curated few that could read the Latin and tell
Mm-hmm.
peons what God was saying versus like, nah, just let the pigs read the Bible. They can figure it out, right? Duncan Trussell always says these like throughout human history, we just have example after example of a bunch of cunts wanting to guard the information from the rest of us. And then they say it's for our best. And then once we figure it out, once it gets distributed, society makes huge leaps forward, and nothing bad really happens.
Well, I don't know. I look at the modern evangelical movement and think that something bad might have happened, but that's
Listen,
just me.
listen, listen. You can't win them all, Rod. So we have iPhones and we can put together this podcast. There are also
Mm-hmm.
people exchanging child porn.
Yeah.
Like it, for the most part, though, I'd say it's probably a good move. So again, you almost have this like romanticism of like, oh, back when things were, you look at like an old castle made of stone and it's still fine, or just like, yeah, those old like World War I battleships, and they're just ornate and beautiful. And sure, things are cheaper now and they break, but I would almost
But
argue that it's better because a farmer in India has a cell phone.
yeah. Well, and also that old shit that was built like brick shit house also cost a fortune.
Yeah.
So only someone like Elon Musk of his era could afford one.
Or Carnegie, or so in the
Yeah.
same way it was the same gatekeepers.
So yeah, so that's sort of the thing. It's just been democratized. We're now, that was the thing in 1980 when Radio Shack and Apple and Commodore came out with computers that an ordinary individual could afford. Uh, the TRS-80, Radio Shack, the Commodore 64, VIC-20 before that were kind of toy-like. They were very noticeably plasticky, not very durable. But they were computers. The Apple II was a little better made. It was more. It could stand. It could pass for a business machine a little better than the Radio Shack and Commodore ones could. But it was IBM that came through with, we want the keyboard to feel like a Selectric typewriter keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of their design goals. And so if you have one of those old Model M keyboards, then it's like, it feels exactly like typing on a Selectric 2. And it will absolutely, if you have a roommate, you will end up getting defenestrated because they will throw you out of the window for all the sound that it makes if you use it at night.
This is my gaming keyboard. All right, you can hear this versus like my Apple Space Age. Oh, I forgot. Oh fuck, I'm using this computer.
Yeah, yeah. The
gaming
original
computer's off. That's why I smashed the keyboard. I completely forgot I'm recording the podcast on here. Let's
Yeah.
start pressing buttons.
The original IBM PC keyboard used springs and mechanical contacts, and was over $100 in 1981.
Jeez.
So, but IBM wanted that machine to look like a business device. In fact, if you look over my shoulder here, that is the case of the original IBM PC, the Model 5150. That one had several different main boards in it before the form factor changed and I abandoned it, but I couldn't bear to get rid of it because that case weighs at least 10 pounds. That is a piece of office equipment circa 1980 that, it's made of steel and
Yeah.
no compromises. It is an absolute piece of business office equipment.
God, there's this book called A Dirty Job. And it's this weird thing about like, I don't know, like ghosts on Earth, and if like a family member died. Not important. It's a great book. But there's this description in there of a car from the 50s that's making me think of what you just. I have to find it. Hold on. Roger.
I used to own I used to own a 1966 Cadillac Fleetwood that I bought from one of my neighbors for $500. And that car weighed 5,000 pounds.
Dirty Job.
I know because I put that car on a truck scale. I work for a scale company. Everything on that car was made of solid metal. The clock in the dashboard weighed at least 10 pounds.
Keep holding it down, Roger. I've almost found it.
But the other thing though is that those cars weren't engineered as well as modern cars as far as keeping shit out of the passenger compartment in an accident. And it's funny how it's the modern car that weighs half as much is actually safer in an accident than those things were.
Okay, I found the whole book's not even. It's a good book, but whatever. The 1957 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham, Brougham, was the perfect show off of death machines. It consisted of nearly 3 tons of steel stamped into a massively high-tailed beast, lined with enough chrome to build the Terminator and still have parts left over. Most of its long, sharp strips peeled off on impact and became lethal size to flay away pedestrian flesh. Under the four headlights, it sported two chrome bumper bullets that looked like unexploded torpedoes or Triple G Madonna death boobs. It had a non-collapsible steering column that would impale the driver upon any serious impact, electric
Yep.
windows that could pinch off a kid's head, no seat belts, and a 325 horsepower V8 with such appallingly bad fuel efficiency that you could hear it trying to slurp liquefied dinosaurs out of the ground when it passed. It had a top speed of 110 miles an hour, mushy, barge-like suspension that could in no way stabilize the car at that speed, and undersized power brakes that wouldn't stop it either. The fins jutting from the back were so high and sharp that the car was a lethal threat to pedestrians even when parked, and the whole package sat on a tall, white wall tires that looked and generally handled like oversized powdered donuts. Detroit couldn't have achieved more deadly finned ostentation if they had covered a killer whale in rhinestones. It was a masterpiece.
Yeah, much of that applies to my old Fleetwood. It did have seat belts, but they were lap belts, so I never wore them. It had leather upholstery. The upholstery was still beautiful.
Yeah.
It was this aqua blue, but the outside paint job had oxidized. So it looked beautiful after a rain, but when it was dry, it looked like this car can't possibly have insurance. And they had gotten rid of the fins by then. The fins were understated, but yeah, the headlights, same deal. All of the headlight hardware, the turn signal indicators were not on the dashboard. They were out on the fenders. And the turn signal indicator sockets, you would pull up this cast pot metal assembly that weighed 2 or 3 pounds out of the fender. That would be where the light bulb was for the turn signal indicator for the driver of the car. It was nuts. And we drove that car for years. Had a 429 V8. The suspension had been fixed by then. That car could go 110 miles an hour, and it was smooth as glass. I drive across the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway fairly frequently, and the old span that was built in the 50s badly needs to be leveled. So you're going all the way across. That car was absolutely smooth. But yeah, there were stories of people who had that car who got a flat tire and didn't know it until they stopped 80 miles later, which I believe. And I eventually got rid of it because it only got 13 miles to the gallon.
Yeah,
but it was great to drive. The other thing was the way it was styled is you could back up to a wall, and you could back that car up to within 1 inch of a brick wall and not hit the wall and just know exactly where you were, because the top of those fins, that was the back of the car. You could see exactly where it was. Same with the front of the car. It was 22 feet long, and it drove like a compact car.
22.
It wouldn't fit in my driveway. It wouldn't fit in my garage.
22.
It was too long to fit in the garage in this house.
How long's like a Suburban?
They're more like 18.
22.
Yeah.
Lord.
And
that's awesome.
The trunk stuck at least 5 or 6 feet out past the rear wheels.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the reasons it handled so well, though, is like I said, I put it on a truck scale. I had a job one day at the sugar refinery in Chalmette, and I drove the car, and it was 3-axle truck scale. So I drove the car onto the scale, put the front wheels on one platform, the rear wheels on the other. They were within one count. They weighed 2,500 pounds each.
Yeah, probably perfectly balanced.
It was perfectly balanced. Every other car I've ever driven is like the axle that the engine is sitting on weighs 3 times what the other axle does. And that's why they fishtail all over the place if you hit ice or something.
Yeah.
That car was a dream to drive. But it was also just massive. And there's no way that you could justify building something like that today. And like the guy said, if you were in an accident, non-collapsible steering column, you had a steering column through your heart. That's just.
And he doesn't even mention a lot of this before the advent of safety glass.
Yeah, I think that the Fleetwood did have a safety glass windshield. I know it had hardened glass windows. So that was one of the things, though, because it was a 66 and not a 57. So that was about 10 years later. So they were actually improving it, but the priority was that was a heavy fucking car. You did not want to be in a compact car and get hit by that car. And everyone knew it. My wife loved driving that car
Yeah,
because she
tank.
would go to merge into traffic. She said one time she was merging in and there was this guy in like a souped up little pickup truck and he took one look and hit the brakes and let her in. It was like,
Absolutely. It's a single, it's a, I
people
mean,
would cringe.
it really is. I mean, it's like indicative of just like the wartime industry of World War II America. Like we just kind of pivoted and started making
Yeah.
APCs for the nuclear family.
Well, it was like computer equipment in that era
Yeah.
with all these heavy ass parts and precision machined guides and stuff and all to process data
Yeah.
because that was how we the only way we knew to do it. This is all that existed before there was computers. And so when we did start building computers, that was how we were building them with these techniques that were familiar, and they were very stupidly expensive, but there were customers for them who could afford them. So that's what we did until people came along and said, we can democratize this. We can actually pare this down to something a lot more reasonable because information goes at the speed of light and it doesn't weigh anything. There's no reason that information has to have a 500-pound disk drive to process it.
So okay, you can do. I got 9 more minutes. I guess kind of to maybe segue out of this one. What, in your estimation, are we going to be looking at? All right, because I was born in 1990. I remember late 90s computers, but to me they weren't really fundamentally different than they were slower with less memory. And where we are now is okay, the screens are flat. You
Yeah.
can put it in your pocket now with an iPhone, but it's still kind of like there's a screen, there's an internet, there's programs. But
Yeah.
you saw an actual like an alchemical change from lead to gold. Like you saw punch cards and vacuum tubes turn into where we are now. What are what is going to be my version of that when I'm doing a podcast in 20 years? Like, what am I, is there gonna, what's the next jump up of where I'm gonna be like, I remember when it was the metal and plastic thing that I had on my desk. Like, can you even guess what that would be?
I would say that we are at a mature point where the user interfaces, the way that we interact with the machine is probably not going to change significantly until we have something like brain machine interfaces or true artificial general intelligence, where we can just tell the machine what we want it to do and not worry about how it gets done because it won't do something stupid. Uh, these are both holy grails of certain very rich people that could easily be mentioned. Uh, I don't think that Meta's vision of the metaverse is going to happen anytime soon because the whole thing of wearing the goggles and all that is not practical. Uh, Now, there is a little short film called Sight, Sight, which is kind of hard to find and search because its name is so generic, but it's a fictionalized account of in the future, your eyeballs can be outfitted with displays that superimpose things on your field of view and interface with the internet, which is much faster and everything. So you can walk into a house
Yeah,
that,
AR.
yeah, and almost everything you're looking at, all the shit on the walls isn't really there. It's being put there by your eyes and superimposed according to the guy, the person whose house you're in has defined it that way.
Oh, okay.
And so it's seamless. Uh, and of course, the end of the little short is that uh, there's a downside to that too, because it can be misused.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's you're trusting elements of your own consciousness to machines that you don't actually have any control over or understand, and that introduces some really metaphysical problems.
Do you think that, do you think this is going to be like a generational thing? Like, my dad always points out, you know, to him, it's always if I say like, oh, I talked to my little brother today. Yeah, my dad would always point out, he'd be like, "Did you talk to him?" And to me, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, "Yeah, we're texting." He's like, "That's not talking." And to me, I'm always like, what's the difference? Like, hey, I talked to Dr. Malone yesterday. How'd you talk to him? Well, I emailed him and I said, to me, that's talking. Like you and I,
Mhm.
to me, this is as in depth as I get with people, is honestly.
Yeah.
And but to my dad, it was like, did you like hear their voice? And I'm just like, no,
Yeah.
I can't. But to me, I don't think anything about it because I've grown up with that. I've
Yes.
grown even AOL Instant Messenger in middle school. Do you think this is going to be a generational thing where I have this like weird sort of uncanny valley when I look at AR and AI and I go augmented reality, AR, VR, and AI, augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, where I go, I'm gonna be the old person. I'm gonna be the old man on the block that doesn't have it.
Oh yeah. That's I think even today's kids who are in their who are preteens and early teens, you're going to find that your experience of the world is very different from theirs.
Yeah.
And yours is very different from mine, obviously. I mean, I've had people ask, well, what radio station, what do you do when you're driving to work? It takes me almost an hour to get to work and and then another hour to get home. And people, and I tell people a lot of times I don't even turn the radio on, or I'll turn the radio on if it's the top of the hour and listen to the news, and they'll turn it off because I don't want to hear all the assholes who are calling into WWL. And they're like, well, what are you doing? It's like, well, for one thing, I'm driving the car.
Yeah.
That's like a full-time job, isn't it? Uh, but to them, to not have constant
Stimulation.
stimulation, they're not used to that. No one ever
I
uh, trained them to deal with not having a constant stream of stimulative input.
Yeah.
And that's going to be really interesting when these guys get to be job age or join the military. And they're going to find out that there's long periods of just being there and waiting for something to happen. And you can't necessarily spend the whole time doing this with your phone. That, there may be reasons that you can't. And there may be reasons that it would just be a bad idea, even if you could. And I mean, I'd say about half the people that I work with can't eat lunch without a phone in their hand.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's
And,
not. Yeah.
and I find that bizarre. And in fact, there's people who have called and complained about me. Roger's being incommunicative. I tried to call him and he didn't pick up. Well, that's because my cell phone was on my desk and I was in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Or I was walking to the back of the building so that my eyes don't fix focus 3 feet in front of me because I'm looking at a monitor all day. And I don't take the phone with me when I walk away from my desk. And there's people that I work with who simply can't understand that. To them, it's like, what is wrong with Roger?
Yeah.
He doesn't have his phone with him.
I'll have people. I answer my emails. There's a 1 hour window a day that I answer all of them. People will be like, I
Yeah.
emailed you back, and I'm like, well, or hey, I left
Yeah.
you a
I know.
voicemail at 11 o'clock. My phone goes on airplane mode after I call my mom. So around 8 p.m. Eastern, it
Yeah.
goes on. I might text Roger now and again, like, but no, it's off. You don't just because
Yeah.
the technology exists doesn't mean that you get access.
I don't bother turning it off because my phone stays here at the end of this wire. It
Yeah,
keeps it charged.
yeah,
And this office is on the opposite corner of the house from my bedroom.
perfect.
So this phone can make all the noise it wants at 2 a.m. It ain't waking me up.
Yeah,
And that's been the case for, well, I didn't have the phone in 1992 when I moved into this house, but ever since I got the phone, that's just like, and there are people who are just like, what's wrong with Roger? Why isn't Roger answering his phone? I emailed you 2 hours ago, man. It's like, I
yeah,
tend to check my email in the morning and I usually check it in the afternoon before I leave work. And sometimes if I happen to be sitting here and the phone goes off, then I'll pick it up. Like when you texted me and asked if I could do 5 o'clock instead of 6. I happened to be sitting here and I was
sure.
like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. But if I was at the other side of the house, I might or might not have caught that.
Yeah,
That's my habit with the phone. It's not a part of my body that I can't. I don't feel like I'm suffocating if I don't have the phone.
My that's one thing I do is why I don't keep social media apps on my phone is because
Oh, they're designed to cultivate that idea.
well, it keeps me it actually makes me put my phone down more because I'm like I'm not scrolling through something. And I mean that's why I meditate every day. I think it's really important to just because there's also like a weird almost a tolerance you have to build up because it's not just that, oh, I want to be entertained. You do it long enough and you actually start to feel uncomfortable when you're by yourself. And
Yes.
to me, I'm like, that's not a good thing that's not a good habit to develop is I need
No.
stimulation. You need to be okay with the first like 30 seconds of meditation are always actually kind of scary because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
who boy, I'm just sitting here. But really it's under a minute and that goes away. And then you
And that's good because there's a lot of people now, particularly these younger kids, who no one has even told them that was a good idea. Their parents have just gave them the phone because it's a perfect babysitter.
yeah, just shut up. Yeah.
Just here's the phone. Shut up. Don't bother me. And so they've never had to calm themselves to figure out how to exist without something compensating. I mean, like literally, I've been at the lunch table and there's 10 people there, and six of them are doing
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
I'm guilty. I'm guilty.
I'd never
That's
do that. It's like my I never take my phone to the lunch table. That's to me that would be like ruining two experiences.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I guess that's one of the things that like has driven me is I used to always listen. I got to run because there's a guest waiting, but
Yeah.
I used to always listen to music working out between like 2004 when I started and probably like 2020, and I finally realized I was like I'm at the gym for like an hour, walking to workout, coming back, shower. That's like an hour block a day that I'm listening to something. And I love
Mm-hmm.
listening to something, takes my mind off of the workout. That finally, about the time I started the podcast, is when I decided that's a perfect time to listen to an audiobook. At least
Mm-hmm.
get something out of it. So that's one thing I try to do. I'm like, I don't keep Reddit on my phone. I don't keep anything, nothing. The only apps I keep on my phone are the apps that I use to post the podcast on, like Getter and
Yeah.
Parlor, but I don't use them because they're shit and no one's on them. So there's nothing pulls. I have to take Twitter off because Twitter is great. It pulls me in. Um, but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of coworkers who are addicted to podcasts for that same reason. They can't
yeah,
stand silence. So they've learned that the podcast is more interesting than music that they've heard 100 times already.
yeah,
Personally, yeah, it's and that's a general. But I think that the generation coming up after you, the people who are in their preteens and early teens today, are having a much different experience than even you did, uh, much less people my age, and that is going to color how they interact with machines in a very general way, in ways that will seem very strange to both of us. Uh, it's hard to say exactly how at this point because that's the whole why do they call it the singularity? Because you can't see what's on the other
yeah.
side
It's
of
where
it.
you're yeah. It's
Uh, but yeah, it's definite that there's going to be a difference in how they see that. They're already a lot more willing to put up with shit that people your age and my age look at and go, nope. It's like,
absolutely not. Yeah,
yeah, and they're more like, what's the problem? It's like, oh, so they know everything about me. Well, big deal. I know,
got nothing to hide.
yeah. It's like,
Woo, woo, baby. Yeah, it's uh,
well, I think a lot of them just got a big fucking wake up call though, because I don't know if you saw Michael Moore was on Bill Maher's show on Friday, and he and I made the same observation without knowing that each other had done it, which is uh, that there is probably going to be a blue, not red wave in the midterm elections. And a large reason for that is Dobbs and the re illegalization of abortion,
oh,
because a lot of people who have taken it for granted their entire lives that this was not going to be a problem have suddenly found out that things can change. And every single election that has been held since Dobbs has had a 6 to 7 point swing toward the Democrats, even
what's
when the Democrat lost.
what's Dobbs?
That was the
That was the
decision.
case.
That was the case that overturned Roe versus Wade.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
So since that, every single election that has been held anywhere in the United States has swung 6 to 7 points toward the Democrats.
Interesting.
Even when the Democrat lost, they
Interesting.
lost by a lot less than they did the last time there was an election in that venue. And it's obvious that Mitch McConnell has already resigned himself to the fact that he's not going to be Senate leader in
Mitch
the next.
McConnell's also a Chinese mole. That guy should be in Guantanamo.
He's a turtle.
His wife's father is the
Yes.
chairman
Oh
of the
yeah.
board of the
That's
biggest military industrial defense contractor in China.
yeah. Now the thing is, the House is generally considered more conducive to crazy people getting elected because it's easier to find a concentration of crazy people the
Mm-hmm.
size of a House district than
Mm-hmm.
it is to find a crazy people of an entire
Full.
state.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people who are starting to realize that they are not expecting even the House to flip, even though
Interesting.
all of the old models would say, oh yeah, sure, there should be a red wave. It's a midterm. Midterms always go against the sitting president, and the Democrats were barely hanging. They barely had a majority, so they're obviously going to. That's not no. There's ever more serious people who are thinking no, because you have all of these crazy shithouse rats winning their primaries, and they have no chance in hell of winning a general election
Hmm.
except in the craziest of districts. And there's a few of those crazy districts that will reelect Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, but
Sure.
there's not a lot of them,
Sure.
and so it's gonna be interesting. But I was really interested to see because I made that assessment.
You
Uh,
did on here
yes,
a couple
and
weeks ago.
I'm kind of sticking by it. And I was very interested to see Michael Moore because Michael Moore was one of the three people who predicted Trump would win in 2016.
Yeah, no, he did. And he
Uh,
wasn't for it. He was just like, this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah, he has his ear to the ground, and he is not the kind of person to give you happy talk when he thinks something that he doesn't like is going to happen. He's going to tell
He's
you.
not a yeah, like him or not, he's
And
not a stupid guy.
he was on real time basically saying, "No, I think this time it's going to be a Democratic blowout because you have a bunch of people who have suddenly been woken up by
Yeah,
stuff that is happening, and they've realized that politics can affect them, and voting is free."
interesting. Um,
So,
I was gonna say, on a final note, I'm such a bad but letting this guest wait there. My buddy in college used to say when people this was back in 2013, they'd be like, I texted you last night. He'd be like, what time? They'd be like 11:05. He'd be like, I come to your house tonight at 11:05 and start banging on the door. You answering that door? No, you're fucking not. That's what I've always picked it as. I'm coming in, if I'm banging at your door 1 in the morning going, hey, do you want to do a podcast tomorrow? You're calling the cops if I'm lucky. Like, so that's one thing. And the other thing, like, I'm a bad salesman. I'm sitting here telling people, turn off the audio. You don't need something. What am I doing for a living? Listen to my audio, but I'm telling you, hey, turn it off, meditate, find
it's
some
true.
peace.
It's truth.
Yeah, it's because I love podcasts when I'm driving. I love listening to something like Tim Dillon. But man, sometimes I'll do a 4 hour drive, nothing,
Just quiet.
just observing,
Yeah.
it's there's peace in there.
If you want to find a story or something, then you have to make a space for it to appear.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like that. That's a quote. I saw another great one. Yeah, no. Happiness is always available to us, but it's have you created a space for it to flourish?
Mm-hmm.
It's there. You gotta it's there. That's what I love about, yeah, driving quietly. Let your mind wander and then it will pick up on something. And next thing you know, you're going down versus if you're just perfectly placated from the second you wake up till you go to bed. It's sure there's not a whole lot of anxieties, but there's no adventure.
Yeah,
You're never
there's
here. You're
you're
always
not actually doing something. You're just absorbing shit.
yeah. You're just a diaper. Well, I'm This person's probably gonna blow their
I
head
take
off.
care of your guest.
I know. I'm a fucking terrible. I'm a terrible host. Roger Williams. I love you as always. We'll start next week with readings. We'll get back to it.
Book
And
three.
Gucci.
You're gonna like book three. A lot of dramatic shit is gonna happen in book three.
Beautiful.
Not as much world building because we've already done that.
Well, much like the Nazis with IBM, we've already got the infrastructure laid out. Not sure
Yes.
if that's the best pitch, but you know what? Can't unring a bell. It's out there now. So, well,
We'll figure it out.
on that note. All right, Roger. Hey, I'll text this to you when it's up and we will resume next